I think we can talk about post-colonialism today. One of the reasons for talking about the colonial enterprise or the post-colonial endeavor is that it's a pan-global phenomena today. When I talk about a pan-global phenomena, I'm trying to talk about countries that are writing back all the time. You have many narratives that talk about how the colonial enterprise can be answered back. Obviously, what is very germane here is the idea of neocolonialism, how many countries are trying to dominate markets and economies and trying to have their own discourse upon the people who cannot really buy or sell goods. Well, this podcast is very important for students of masters in various universities in India and also for a lay reader and viewer who has an interest in post-colonialism. What is very important for us to understand is that we have economic realities today. We don't have nations anymore. And when I talk about an economic reality, I'm trying to talk about how you have the idea of currency or the Bitcoin and this kind of ideas taking credence over earlier ideas about colonialism. You have the idea of nation states that are writing back. And also there are new ways of negotiating reality and identities as per many theorists like Bhabha obviously talks about hybridity, which is quite old now. Well, I'm very privileged to have with me and us today a very important and eminent speaker, Professor Dr. Dibyakusum Ray. Well, he needs no introduction because he is a distinguished lecturer and a faculty member in the very important place called IIT Ropar in Punjab. And we are very fortunate to have him with us today. And Professor Ray, welcome to the podcast on post-colonialism.
Thank you very much, Arnab. I'm very privileged to be here.
Yeah, the pleasure is ours, sir. Sir, I think when we are talking about post-colonialism, I think you also have a very important book called The Postcolonialism and the City that was published by Routledge in 2022. Please correct me anywhere if I'm wrong. Well, one of the reasons to have the podcast on post-colonialism is that we have this paper in our MA, in our third semester, and also we have post-colonial poetry and we have post-colonial fiction. But what is very important for us is to know how do we define post-colonialism and whether it is still a global phenomena in that way, or what are the nuances of, what are the nuances that come into play when we define post-colonialism? So what would be your take on that?
So the answer to the single question would probably take an entire day, maybe an entire course. So I will not try in vain to give an expansive answer because it's not possible. What is possible, however, to use an adage, a British adage, which probably every English studies scholar is familiar with, the adage is, the king is dead, long live the king. Exactly that way. I would also use this term in a slightly, let's say, different way, which is post-colonialism is dead, long live post-colonialism. The reason why I say is that even if 5 years ago, had I been here, had you asked me the same question, I would have answered in a completely different way. But in the last decade, post-colonialism, the way we used to understand it, people of our age, people of our peer group, that has completely changed. Post-colonialism for us was a certain canonical structure where after colonialism there is a certain body of work which actually reflects, which adheres to certain architectonics of the discipline. So it's a discipline. Post-colonialism was a discipline. It was more or less easy, or should I say predictable, for us to understand that a certain work is post-colonial because there were markers, there were demonstrable ideas through which one work could have been fashioned to be a post-colonial work. Not so much now. Actually, it's not at all now. It has changed in drastic ways. First of all, I think scholastically post-colonialism as an academic discipline has run its course. Its steam, it doesn't exist anymore, at least the way we used to think it was. Now post-colonialism is, should I say, fractalized. It has broken into a million parts. Each part has a distinctive idea of its own. English literature, or should I say English post-colonial literature, doesn't really exist anymore. Now, it has become several other disciplines. It has become some radical terms like digital humanities, like plastic humanities, like plant humanities, blue humanities, eco-criticism. Absolutely. And something that I have worked on, urban studies, yes. And then, of course, there is IKS, Indian Knowledge System as well. So to answer your question, Arnab, postcolonialism, while it definitely exists, it does not exist the way canonical, the sense, in the canonical sense, as we as students, we used to understand postcolonialism, even maybe in now, for right now, in net books, net set, or other guidebooks, GMAT and stuff like that, where exactly you'll be finding the an exact definition of postcolonialism. It really does not exist anymore. What exists is a very malleable, very unstable domain, which is trying to gather a shape, but I think it will be a few generations before it gathers a complete shape like before.
That's quite understandable. So I think, are there any specific reasons for post-colonialism not to exist anymore? Do you have the concept of new economic realities or new economic orders coming up, sir?
Definitely, definitely. The first thing that we all need to understand, sitting in this room, listening to this podcast, anybody, so to speak, that civilization is at a crisis right now. And that crisis is not an existential crisis. It's not a spiritual crisis, not something intangible. It's extremely tangible thanks to global warming, thanks to us. Existential crisis, the face of any annihilation, the sense that we may not exist, or our children may not exist, or the earth can be uninhabitable, is a very tangible thing. Now, it is going to happen. The worst thing about it is that we know, all of us, although we are in a constant state of denial, that it is happening. It definitely will happen. To what extent, to what margin, that's probably a more specialized knowledge, but there is no denial that this is going to happen. So being in a situation like that, in this constant position of precarity as such, naturally, the certain idea of a canon being self-established, something that is comfortable, something that is, how should I put it, very self-sustaining, like post-colonialism was before. Of course, it must not exist anymore, and it is not existing. It is broken, and everybody is trying to grasp for new ways out of the general gloom that is being cast over academia.
That's the wonderful way of explaining that, sir. So, I'm very tempted to ask if transnationalism is the new avatar of postcolonialism. What would you say about that? Or it's a bit different because we also have transnational histories. And when I talk about Amitabh Ghosh, for example, the Sea of Poppies, am I talking about post-colonial encounters, or am I talking about transnationalism?
It's a very interesting question. It's a question, unfortunately, I'm not exactly sure whether I'm qualified to answer, because it's a very German and a very deep question. So is transnationalism right now post-colonialism? Oh, to a certain extent, definitely, as much as I can think. It's definitely, and not only that, this because the crisis is general, be it political, be it economic, or be it environmental. I'm pretty sure they're all connected. Naturally, their response is also literary response from different domains of the world, from different parts of the world, from different literary scenarios. Naturally, there is supposed to be a commonality, and that commonality definitely exists. So in that sense, yes, transnationalism can definitely be very much related to post-colonialism these days. Having said that, as you know, right now, in India, especially in the so-called post-colonial countries, there is also a certain need for going through, or rather, should I say, going deep into one's own traditions, one's own history, one's own micro histories as such, from which actually disciplines like IKS is coming into existence. I'm not going into the deeper socio-political intricacies of it, but on a very surface level, that is basically what it is. So in that way, not only transnationalism, but also a self-reflection as well. So should I and this would just sound horribly verbose, and I do absolutely apologize for that. But could we use the term self-reflexive transnationalism? That probably would be a more accurate way to describe it.
Thank you, sir, for the insightful answer. Well, my next question was actually about if post-colonialism is still going strong as a discipline, but you say that it has run its course, then why do we have post-colonial colonialism as a discipline or a part of the curriculum or the structure in any syllabus in India? So what's the reason for its pervasiveness?
First of all, the pervasiveness happens because any discipline as established as postcolonialism, before its passing, it has a long, long afterlife. It definitely is not going to go away just silently one fine morning. Postcolonialism is all gone. That simply doesn't happen like that. Second, and probably the more acute answer to this question would be, while you throw an arrow from your bow, it first goes back in order to go forward. So if postcolonialism is evolving, as I said it is, I wouldn't say it's a destruction or it's a perishment, not really. It's an evolution. It's a radical evolution, but it's definitely an evolution. It has to go back. It has to go back. It has to reflect on itself, which is why the word self-reflexive, once again, it probably is germane in this context. And which is why the students of English literature, whoever is interested in the new forms of postcolonialism, need to know what it is coming from, which is why the canonical texts from Bill Ashcroft to Amitav Ghosh to whomever you can think of, they're definitely not obsolete, or should I say they now form a very important backbone of the new argument that is coming in the place of postcolonialism.
Right. That's true. So I think we are talking about post-colonial sensibility coming in that way. Yes. Right. So, sir, that's a wonderful way of putting in. And yes, we also know that you wrote a wonderful book on post-colonialism and the city that was published by none other than Routledge, the Taylor and Francis Group in 2022. Would you just tell us a bit about your book and your publishing journey with Routledge?
Okay, so first of all, Arnab, I'm not being very humble in here, but to be very frank, publishing a monograph is just it's a mechanical job. It's nothing. I mean, it doesn't hold anybody in any pedestal by publishing it. It's just that there is some hard work involved, definitely. To be very frank, the biggest hard work for any book is to write the manuscript. Right. Because to sustain yourself during the writing, which is 80,000 words, maybe a lakh, maybe even more, that probably is the only challenge. That's actually the only challenge. Okay. That's the only challenge. Otherwise, research-wise, everybody who's listening to this, the person that I'm talking to right now is more than adept at doing this. You yourself have monographs. You know it better than I do. And second thing is that what exactly did I write? I wrote this book because of my love for cities. This love I found, ironically, while living in the wilderness of Punjab, but I did find my love for the cities, and my love for the city. It's not a metaphysical, intangible version of love. I want to explain this more. So what I want to say is that the city is not a metaphysical conception. It's not a definition. It's the very hard, gatherable, tangible, touchable, smellable facts, like, for example, streets, like statistics, like infrastructural statistics, like the number of people living in a certain mohalla and their layerizations as per caste, class, religion, and all the other things are concerned, even gender. So that's what I'm saying, that city is a tangible existence that is also very divided within itself. It's almost like a prismatic perspective. My argument in the book was that I generally do not like to call this particular book as a literary criticism. I would love to call it as a literary history. And what I tried to establish in that book is that Literature has a bad name for being too abstract for serious historiography because it's abstract, it's metaphorical, it's not very factual, as the historians would be saying. But Barth has said this long time ago, that literature can actually fill up the interstices of history. In other words, the history that is only existing in paper and no, let's say, no meta narrative is coming out of it, literature can provide that meta narrative. In other words, the final commentary can be provided by literature because it's a certain sort of reality too. My argument in the book was that these tangible data of the city, number of people, number of footbridges, number of flyovers, all of these things are actually represented by a certain canon of literature in Indian postcolonial studies called the city lit. That is the word that I have used. And I have tried to look at it as time progressed from 1940s to 2000s and try to show that how exactly city is reflected through this book.
So you're also talking about the cityscape in that way.
I am.
Okay, so in what way do you talk about the cityscape? I mean, what are the key ideas? Or one idea, as you talked about, is the city, the flyovers or the concrete structures. You're talking about the conceptual matrix of the city. So were you also very much influenced by any kind of a previous work about the cityscape?
So let me try to give you an example in here. So there is, for the benefit of the audience as well, they may be familiar with a very recent and a very famous Netflix TV series called Sacred Games. Now, Sacred Games, as many people will be knowing, is based on it's a Vikram Chandra book. Actually, it's a massive Vikram Chandra book visible on that. Now, notwithstanding the existence of that TV series, I would rather concentrate on the book itself. And the book is interesting because contrary to the impression the TV series gives you, the book is an extremely long, extremely and intentionally turgid, should I say boring and very monotonous description of day-to-day life. The TV series is far more racy, pacey, thriller-like. Here, all the elements of thrillers are there, but it's not the point. The point is the day-to-day life, which is supposed to be turgid and boring and monotonous, but it's still a habit. So there are long, winding descriptions where the central character, Ganesh Gaitonde, is going from city to city, from Juhu beach to other beach, and seeing the world changing in front of his eyes, seeing Mumbai changing in front of his eyes. So this biographical musings or fictional biographical musings actually become a commentary on the changing infrastructure of the city itself. And that is the cityscape that I have tried to capture through this book.
That's a wonderful way of putting how you have really worked for the book. So yes, another very important question is when you were talking about the book. Well, it's not a very small publisher. It's Routledge, right? One of the best publishers we have in the world. And I, in fact, had a very small publication in Routledge myself, which took over 1.5 years. So what was your publishing journey with Routledge? I mean, how difficult it was, or what exactly was it all about?
This monograph, as I said, it comes from a certain emotional need. But I really didn't have to write a book at that point of time. But I felt that I need to do that. But then again, I do not want to overly mystify it. One can write a book for purely mechanical purpose. Mechanical purpose like publishing, for promotions, for several things and all that. And that does not necessarily devalue their work as long as the work is sincere. Now, my journey was pretty smooth with Routledge. Smooth in the sense, actually, it's supposed to be smooth for everybody. As I said, it's just mechanical. Why? But it's tedious, no doubt about that. There is a big form which you will have to fill up, pitching your book in a certain way. And for that, you need to do a lot of research because the publisher need to know that your book is truly unique. And since many books like yours or close to yours are being written and being published all over the world, why exactly would they be interested in a book like yours? That is the pitching part. And that depends solely on your research and your hard work. There is no trick to it. There is no magic behind it. And there is very less talent involved in that. You just need to be diligent enough to research about your book's background and what are the competing books as such. Then you pitch the book. If all goes well, you'll be contracted. And then comes probably the toughest part, which is writing the book itself. Now, writing the book, I know many scholars, including friends and enemies all over, who has taken years after years after years for writing a book. Now, nobody is going to rush you about writing the book, but this is not a journal publication. It takes time, definitely. But if you're taking a decade or half a decade to write a book, that's simply not very professional. And your contract may actually be void for such a long time because nobody waits for anybody. So writing an 80,000 thing, I would say the best training of it we have had is during our PhD thesis. But then again, many of us start writing books long after we have finished our PhD thesis, so that we are out of the habit. Yes. We just need to get back into the habit. Writing 1,000 words every day. I'm sorry, this probably sounds far less thrilling than one might have expected for this answer, but it is what it is. You'll just have to write every day, and you'll have to write laboriously. You will have to write it like a donkey, and that's all that there is. There is no magic. There is no talent involved in here.
We understand that, sir. But how long did it take for you to write the book and get it to the publisher to be published? I mean, the time frame, was it? I hope more than a year.
Yes. And I'm hesitating. Actually, I'm hesitating to call myself as lucky, because what I count myself to be lucky, actually, for the majority of the country, it was not such a lucky time, which was the COVID. The COVID pandemic came as a blessing in disguise for me, because we were all sitting at home at the time. Yes, there were online classes, but the chore of going to the office every day was not existing. So I had time. Yes, I did definitely have time, and I wrote the book in. I would definitely argue, yes, that it was a short time. I took 6.5 months. And 6.5 months, I would say, is not possible while you're doing a full-fledged job, but you can do it in 10 months. Yes. Of course, you will have to burn the proverbial midnight oil, no doubt about that. But it is what it is. And for 10 months, if you write it, you cut it down to say 80,000 to a lakh words. You put the final full stop, and then you create a distance between yourself and the manuscript itself, because it's your baby. And you love it a lot, and you need some distance between yourselves and the manuscript to judge it with a more or less clear eye. Then maybe a month later, you go back to the manuscript, you read it yourself, and you'll be seeing the faults. Self-criticism is necessary in here. You'll be changing it, and then you'll be sending it to...
You need to be your own merciless editor.
Absolutely. Yes. So you'll be sending it to the publisher. The publisher will send it to peer review. If everything is okay with peer review, then comes a long process of proofreading and proof checking.
Right.
There are several signatures involved. So, putting it in perspective and putting it in a very distinct format, let's say from the contract of your book to the publication of your book, provided that you are writing it in 10 months, it should take 1.5 years.
Okay.
18 months is my humble estimation of the time.
Right, we understand. And that's quite less considered the kind of the voluminous work or the colossal work that you were involved into. That's true. Before I come to the last question for the podcast, any important post-colonial critic that you're very fond of?
Now, I have been, there are several, actually. There are several, and I'm not exactly sure whether they can be called post-colonial authors as such, because they're not very canonical for, say, it's not as canonical as Bhabha, or not as canonical as Bill Ashcroft, but I'm extremely fond of the writing by Oxford University's very famous author, Arthur Quayson. Arthur Quayson is one person that I have written a lot about in my book as well, although Arthur Quayson do not specifically write on cities itself. But his idea of living as a post-colonial being in the urban periphery is something that did really inspire me, and I did really read the hell out of it, if I could, so to speak. There are several others as well, but other person is the name that comes to my surface of the mind.
We understand that. So that was a wonderful way of putting how really you accomplished the big task. That is something which we all need to do as researchers. So that's the point I'm coming to for the penultimate question. That is, are there any words for our students or for the researchers, basically for our students who want to make post-colonialism into a research topic or want to write a book?
Of course. So the word is to slog. There is no other way. First of all, not to be afraid. And second is not to be afraid to slog. So not to be afraid in the sense that I have observed with younger students, like from masters to more senior students like in PhD or even PhD freshers and all that, there is a disbelief about themselves. They do not want to believe that they can do it. They do not want to believe that one day a monograph could be in their hand written by themselves. That is something that is beyond their imagination, that is beyond their dream. Yeah. Supervisor has to take a stand in here and tell him or her or them again and again that this is, which is why I said it so many times in this podcast itself, that there is no talent involved in here. It's just hard work, 100%, if I may say so. If there is 10% talent involved in here, then that 10% talent can be extracted from anybody. If you have come till master's or PhD, you have that talent already. And then comes the slogging part, and this is precisely where it's not only the students, even the supervisors falter, and they falter big time. But taking care of a family, going to a job, getting into that, let's say this comfortable but monotonous day-to-day beat, this has a hypnotic charm of its own. And it really does not let you take the intellectual risks that you're supposed to be taking. You'll just have to come out the shell and write the manuscript, and that's all that is required.
That's true. I think we can relate that very well. Been in the academic profession for a very long time. So I hope this podcast has been very vital for our students and also for a lay reader and viewer of post-colonialism as a topic, because even though Professor Ray rightly pointed out that post-colonialism as an ism has run its course, but still we find post-colonialism as a very important part of the structure of an MA syllabus, and it's still going very strong as a topic, if not as a trend, as what you rightly pointed out. So I'm sure, sir, your wise words and your adroit handling of the topic and the book that you wrote, which I'm sure is available on Amazon and on very important websites, would really be a beacon of light for the researchers and students of MA who can be the future researchers as well. Thank you, Dr. Ray, for coming in and joining the podcast at CU Online. It's been a pleasure listening to you.
Thank you so very much. I've been very happy to be here.
The pleasure is ours. Thank you, sir.